The Galactic Sentience Registry had been cataloging worlds for 11,000 years. In that time, the registry had classified over 2 million inhabited planets, assigned threat ratings to 847,000 death worlds, and formally welcomed 14,000 species into the Interstellar Cooperative of Civilizations. It was, by any objective measure, the most thorough bureaucratic institution in the known galaxy. Senior Assessor Vrethkal of the Collective of Voras had reviewed the classification files for Earth 3 times before submitting his final report. Each time he had expected to find an error. Each time, the numbers confirmed what his instruments had already told him. Earth was a Class 9 death world. The scale only went to 10. Vrethkal sat in his observation pod aboard Zethra Station, a structure so large it had its own weather systems and 3 functioning ecosystems across its interior, and stared at the holographic summary floating before his 4 primary eyes. His secondary eyes twitched with something that, in Voran body language, indicated profound professional discomfort. The file read like a horror novel. Surface gravity, 9.8 meters per second squared. Manageable technically. The Grohl of Mendax Prime dealt with 14.2 and had evolved accordingly, though they moved slowly and had the approximate shape and personality of boulders. Earth's gravity was not the concern. Atmospheric composition, nitrogen-oxygen mix with trace gases. Breathable. Arguably pleasant by galactic standards. Still not the concern. The concern was everything else. Vrethkal pulled up subsection 7c of the Environmental Hazard Report, which covered what Earth organisms called weather. The planet had a phenomenon called a tornado, a rotating column of air that could reach wind speeds of 480 km per hour and tear physical structures from the ground. It also had hurricanes, which were essentially organized systems of catastrophic wind and water that could span hundreds of kilometers, last for weeks and level coastal civilizations. There were also blizzards, dust storms, hailstorms, and something charmingly referred to as fire tornadoes, which were exactly what they sounded like. The planet's tectonic system was still active. Not gently active the way old geological systems tended to be in their twilight eras, but violently, unpredictably active. Entire regions could be rendered uninhabitable by seismic events with no warning. Underwater geological events could generate waves of water, tsunamis, that moved at the speed of a commercial transport vessel and could reach heights of 30 meters when they made landfall. The oceans, which covered 71% of the surface, were filled with organisms specifically evolved to kill and consume other organisms. The largest of these was a creature called a great white shark. But Vrethkal had reviewed the complete marine threat assessment and found that the planet's oceans contained threats at every depth, every temperature range and every ecological niche. There were creatures with venom. Creatures with crushing force. Creatures with both. There were microscopic organisms in the water capable of causing fatal illness within days. There were jellyfish, soft, translucent, seemingly harmless creatures, that could deliver enough neurotoxin to kill a being 3 times the size of the average Earth human. And yet, Vrethkal murmured to himself in Voran, they swim in it. Recreationally. He moved on to the land-based threats. The file was 847 pages long. Earth had venomous snakes on every continent except one, and that one had been colonized by humans anyway. It had spiders capable of killing a human with a single bite. It had insects that could inject anticoagulants into a host, feed on their blood while they slept, and transmit fatal parasitic diseases. A particularly efficient creature called a mosquito was responsible for more human deaths throughout history than any other animal. It had bears, wolves, lions, tigers, crocodiles, hippopotamuses, which Vrethkal had initially dismissed as docile herbivores until he read their behavioral profile and discovered they were among the most aggressive creatures on the planet. Cape buffaloes, elephants capable of trampling structures, and something called a cassowary, which was a large flightless bird with a dagger-shaped claw on each foot that it used to disembowel threats. And that was before getting to the microbial threats. Earth's pathogen catalog occupied a separate file entirely. Vrethkal had reviewed Deathworld files before. It was part of his job. He had assessed Keltraxis 4, where the atmosphere itself was mildly corrosive and the native fauna had evolved shells capable of withstanding plasma fire. He had assessed the burning reaches of Morduum, where the average surface temperature was 80 degrees Celsius and the dominant life form had learned to weaponize lava flows. He had assessed Vex 7, a planet so hostile to outside life that a survey drone had been destroyed within 4 minutes of atmospheric entry. Earth's Class 9 rating was not given lightly. What pushed it to a 9, rather than the 6 or 7 that a world with its basic parameters might otherwise receive, was the combination, The sheer overlapping, relentless, comprehensive hostility of every system on the planet working simultaneously. Weather events, geological instability, apex predators, venomous creatures, microscopic pathogens, radiation from an unstable star cycle, and an axial tilt that guaranteed dramatic seasonal shifts across most of the habitable zones. Earth was not merely dangerous in one way. It was dangerous in every way at every scale all the time. And its native intelligent species had not only survived this, they had thrived. Vrethkal pulled up the human civilization profile. 8.1 billion individuals. Spacefaring capability achieved. Interstellar communication established. Multiple functioning political structures, which was impressive given that most species took an additional 2,000 years of development after achieving spaceflight before they managed genuine planetary governance. He flagged the file for priority review and sent a formal notification to the cooperative's First Contact Division. His personal note at the bottom of the notification read, "Exercise extreme caution. These beings evolved on a Class-9 Deathworld and appear to be unaware that their home planet is considered one of the most hostile environments in the catalogued galaxy. Psychological assessment strongly recommended before diplomatic engagement." He hesitated, then added a second note. "Also, they swim in their oceans for fun." He sent the notification and sat back, all four eyes blinking slowly in the Voran equivalent of deeply unsettled contemplation. 3 days later, humanity received its first official communication from the Galactic Cooperative of Civilizations. The human response took 7 hours to compose, which the cooperative's analysts noted was unusually fast for a species receiving first contact. The response was courteous, enthusiastic, and contained 17 specific questions about interstellar travel mechanics, 4 questions about the composition of the cooperative, and 1 question that the translation AI initially flagged as a possible error. The question was, "Also, you classified Earth as a Class 9 death world, what's a Class 10? Vrethkal personally drafted the response. "A Class 10 death world," he wrote, "is a theoretical classification reserved for planets where even the act of observation from orbit poses existential risk to survey equipment. No confirmed Class 10 exists in our current catalog." The human response came back in 40 minutes. "Sounds like you haven't been to Venus." Vrethkal stared at that response for a long time. Then he pulled up the Solar System survey file and looked up Venus. Then he quietly updated Earth's classification notes to include a subsection titled, "Additional planetary hazards present in home system, see attached Venus file." He was starting to understand, in a way he hadn't before, exactly what kind of species humanity was. Ambassador Keita Nakamura had been humanity's diplomatic representative to the Galactic Cooperative for exactly 11 months when she was formally invited to address the Academy of Civilizations, the cooperative's most prestigious academic institution and the foremost center for xenosociological studies in the known galaxy. She accepted immediately, which her assistant, a young man named Darius who handled scheduling and had the useful quality of worrying about things so that Keita didn't have to, noted with some concern. "Ambassador," Darius said carefully, "the Academy has about 4,000 students from 200 different species. Their last human lecturer was..." "There was a last human lecturer?" "No. You'd be the first. Even better. Helix Prime was a beautiful world." Keita had been there 4 times and still found herself pausing occasionally just to look at things. The bioluminescent forests that glowed amber and violet in the twilight hours, the vast crystalline river systems that caught starlight and scattered it across the plains, the architecture of the cooperative's administrative districts, which had been built over 6,000 years by dozens of species and therefore looked like the collaborative fever dream of beings with fundamentally different ideas about what buildings should do. The planet's most impressive feature from a human perspective was how utterly, serenely safe it was. The native fauna were gentle. The weather was mild. The geological systems were ancient and stable. Walking through the gardens outside the Academy complex, Keita sometimes felt a faint, irrational sense of unease that she eventually identified as the absence of the low-level threat awareness that humans carried everywhere without knowing it, the background processing that said this bush could hide something, that body of water might have something in it, that animal over there is making an unusual sound. On Helix Prime, nothing was trying to eat her. It was slightly disorienting. The lecture hall held 3,800 students arranged in a vast bowl-shaped amphitheater. Species from across the cooperative occupied their designated environmental sections. Atmospheric barriers separated regions with different air compositions, specialized seating accommodated beings of wildly varying sizes and body plans, and a translation system that Keita privately considered the single most impressive technological achievement she had encountered relayed everything in real time. She had been asked to speak on the topic of human civilization development and environmental context. She spoke for 40 minutes. She had prepared careful notes, structured the presentation logically, and kept the language accessible. She talked about human evolutionary history, the pressures that had shaped human cognition and culture, the way that living on a Class-9 death world had produced a species that was simultaneously deeply social and intensely competitive, capable of extraordinary cooperation and extraordinary conflict, with a psychological relationship to danger that the cooperative's xenopsychologists had apparently found very difficult to model. Then she opened it to questions. The first question came from a Voron student in the upper tiers. Vrethkal species, she noted, recognizable by the 4 eyes and the subtle iridescence of their carapace. Ambassador Nakamura, the student said, their translation rendered as a calm, slightly formal tone, our environmental assessment records indicate that Earth's northern regions experience extended periods of extreme cold, temperatures below -40 degrees in some areas. Our understanding is that early humans, prior to significant technological development, survived these conditions. Can you clarify the mechanism by which they did this? Keita nodded. Mostly fire, fur, and stubbornness. We learned to use animal skins for warmth, to build insulating shelters, to preserve food for winter months. We also learned to read weather patterns, track animal migrations, and identify which plants stayed edible under snow. Over time, some populations adapted physiologically. Humans in colder regions tend to have slightly different body fat distribution, metabolism rates, and cold weather vascular responses. A pause rippled through the amphitheater. The Voron students' secondary eyes flickered. And before those technological and physiological adaptations developed? They asked. Before that, Keita said, we were cold. Some of us died. The rest figured something out. Another silence. A second question came from the Groll section. Massive, slow-moving beings who communicated in deep subsonic rumbles that the translation system rendered as a smooth baritone. The files on human history reference a period called the Black Death, the Groll student said. A pathogen event that eliminated approximately 1/3 of the human population in a specific geographic region within several years. How did human civilization functionally continue during this period? Keita considered the question. People kept working, she said. There were social disruptions, certainly, labor shortages, economic instability, political upheaval. Some communities collapsed entirely. But most adapted. They developed quarantine practices, changed burial customs, reorganized agricultural labor. In some respects, the labor shortage that followed actually accelerated certain social changes and technological developments. The Groll student was quiet for a moment. You lost 1/3 of your regional population to a pathogen event, they said slowly, and your response was to reorganize labor practices and improve sanitation. The plague was an important driver of public health development. The amphitheater had gone very still. Keita noticed that several of the alien students were exchanging what she had learned to recognize as significant looks, meaningful glances that crossed species lines and indicated shared processing of unexpected information. A Quillariae student, small, cephalopod-like beings who were among the most intellectually accomplished species in the cooperative and communicated partly through color shifts in their skin, asked the next question. Human literature and cultural output contains extensive engagement with mortality, the Quillariae student said. Their skin flickered through a pattern that the translation system identified as indicating genuine curiosity rather than distress. Art, music, philosophy, religious practice. A significant proportion of documented human cultural production involves themes of death, impermanence, and extinction. Is this related to the environmental context you have described? Keita thought about this carefully. Yes, she said. I think it probably is. When you grow up in an environment where death is a constant background presence, where you understand from childhood that the world contains things that can kill you, that life ends, that loss is real and frequent, you develop a cultural relationship with mortality that's different from species that evolved in safer conditions. We don't look away from death. We write about it. We sing about it. We build religions and philosophies and entire artistic traditions around making sense of it. She paused. I think that's actually one of our more useful qualities, she added. We've had a lot of practice processing terrible things. We're reasonably good at it. The lecture concluded shortly after. As the students filed out, a young cooperative administrator named Sail Who Walks Between Stars, a Quillariae as it happened, approached Kata with a data tablet. "Ambassador," Sale said, skin flickering politely, "I have been assigned to compile the Xenopsychological Assessment of Humanity for the Cooperative's Integration Planning Committee. Would you be willing to answer some additional questions?" "Of course," Kata said. "The committee's primary concern," Sale said carefully, "is whether human psychological resilience, which appears to be significantly higher than the cooperative baseline, might create complications in integrated diplomatic contexts. Species who have not evolved under continuous existential pressure may find humans difficult to predict." Kata smiled. "We find ourselves difficult to predict sometimes too." Sale's skin flickered through a pattern the translation system didn't have a category for. "That," the Quillariae said quietly, "is perhaps the most characteristically human statement I have yet recorded." Commander Yara Osei had been in the Cooperative Defense Fleet for 3 years before she got her first command. She had not expected the command to come because her ship was the only one left functional in a combat zone, but she had learned, over the course of a life spent on Earth and then in space, that situations rarely develop the way you planned for them. The engagement at Kelleran's Gate had begun as a routine escort mission. 4 cooperative vessels carrying medical supplies and infrastructure equipment to the newly established colony on Kelleran 7, a marginal but habitable world on the periphery's edge. Standard security detail. Expected threat level, low. The Vorath Syndicate, a loose coalition of displaced beings who had turned to organized raiding as their primary economic model, had apparently not received the low threat level memo. 12 Vorath vessels had come through the jump point at staggered intervals, a sophisticated entry pattern designed to avoid triggering the detection systems that watched for mass transit events. By the time Commander Osei's sensors identified the tactical picture, 3 of the 4 escort vessels were already engaged, 2 with significant damage, and the cargo ships were being herded toward a secondary jump point. The 4th escort vessel, the cooperative ship INS Steadfast, whose commander was a Groll named Brekka who holds the line, had not yet engaged. It was waiting for tactical coordination from the mission commander. The mission commander was currently dying of a plasma rupture on the first escort vessel. Yara Osei was, by rank, the next most senior officer present. She took approximately 4 seconds to assess the situation, which her crew would later describe as an almost uncomfortably short period of decision-making for circumstances of this complexity. "Brekka," she said over the comm, "I'm assuming tactical command. Follow my lead." The Groll commander's response came back in the deep rumble of their species. "Human Commander Osei, the tactical situation is 12 against 4, 3 of ours damaged, enemy trying to corral the cargo ships." "I see it. Here's what we're doing." What they did, over the next 47 minutes, was something that the Cooperative's after-action analysis team would spend considerable time examining. Yara did not have enough firepower to win a direct engagement. She was aware of this. What she had instead was an understanding of the Vorath Syndicate's operational model. They were raiders, optimized for efficiency and minimal risk to their own assets. They wanted the cargo. They did not want a prolonged fight. Their 12 ships had superior numbers but were spread across a wide engagement zone because they had expected easy targets, not resistance. She used the damaged escort vessels as bait. It was not a comfortable decision. 2 of those vessels had crew aboard who were counting on extraction, not deployment as decoys. But Yara had calculated, with the cold precision that her tactical training had layered over the instincts she'd honed growing up in Lagos and then in Earth's orbital defense network, that pulling those ships into a tighter formation would draw the Vorath into a compressed engagement zone where the Steadfast's superior weapon systems could be brought to bear most effectively. She also, simultaneously, redirected one of the cargo ships, the one carrying prefabricated shelter components rather than medical supplies, making it marginally less irreplaceable, to create a false vector suggesting the cargo was attempting independent escape. The Vorath split their pursuit accordingly. The engagement that followed was brutal and precise. Yara coordinated 4 damaged vessels and 1 healthy one against 12 enemy ships with the focused intensity of someone who had grown up playing competitive contact sports on a planet where the concept of safe play was considered mildly aspirational. She communicated in clipped, direct bursts. She made decisions in seconds that her cooperative counterparts typically needed minutes to process. She took calculated risks that, in retrospect, the after-action analysts would classify as within acceptable parameters, though unusually aggressive for standard cooperative engagement doctrine. 6 Vorath vessels were destroyed. 5 were disabled and captured. 1 escaped through the secondary jump point. All 4 escort vessels survived, though 2 would need extensive repairs. All 3 cargo ships reached Kelleran 7. Commander Brecka, who holds the line, filing his own after-action report 3 days later, included a personal observation that the review committee found sufficiently unusual to flag for the Human Cultural Liaison Office. The observation read, "Commander Osei demonstrated tactical decision-making that I have not previously encountered in 12 years of cooperative defense fleet service." Her response time to new information was approximately 40% faster than the cooperative baseline. Her willingness to accept risk to her own assets in service of overall mission success exceeded what I would consider normal operational parameters. She expressed no visible signs of stress during the engagement, and when I asked her afterward how she had processed the probability of asset loss, she stated, and I quote, "I did the math and figured we'd probably be fine. And if we weren't, then we'd deal with that when it happened." Brecka's report continued, "I do not believe Commander Osei was being reckless. I believe she was being human. The distinction appears to be significant." Yara herself, in her own after-action report, described the engagement in 7 paragraphs, then added a note requesting that the standard cooperative tactical communication protocols be reviewed, as she had found them slightly slow for fast-moving engagements. The Tactical Review Committee, composed of representatives from 9 different species, reviewed her suggestion for 3 months before concluding that the protocols were fine and that Commander Osei was simply operating at a pace calibrated for environmental conditions that no other species in the cooperative had evolved under. They recommended she be given a more prominent command position. They also quietly began a separate study into whether human tactical instincts could be taught to non-human officers. The answer, after 2 years of study, was somewhat, with significant effort, and only to the species with the fastest baseline neural processing speeds. The second recommendation from that study was that human officers should be distributed across cooperative defense forces wherever politically feasible. The third recommendation, the one that was quietly filed rather than circulated broadly, was that the cooperative should never, under any circumstances, create conditions that would make humanity into an enemy. A species that evolved on a Class-9 Deathworld, the study concluded, and built a civilization anyway has already won the most difficult war there is. The rest of us would do well to remember that. The philosopher Ayana Okafor had not intended to become famous. She had come to Keltavari on a research fellowship, studying what the cooperative's philosophical traditions had to say about consciousness, meaning, and the experience of finite existence. She had expected to spend 2 years reading, thinking, writing papers that a few hundred specialists would read, and then returning to her position at the University of Nairobi to continue doing the same things she had done for the previous 15 years. What she had not expected was the debate of the 7 questions. The debate was a tradition on Keltavari that predated the planet's incorporation into the cooperative by several thousand years. Every 20 years, 7 philosophers, 1 from each of the cooperative's founding species, gathered in the amphitheater of first words to argue the fundamental questions of existence. The debates were broadcast across the cooperative and attracted an audience of billions. They were considered the galaxy's most prestigious intellectual event. Humanity was a new member of the cooperative. By tradition, new members were not invited to participate in the debate until they had been part of the cooperative for at least 50 years. The invitation that arrived at Ayana's door on a warm Keltavari morning was therefore irregular. It came from philosopher Quellan of the Deep Mind, the oldest living Quillarii scholar and the chair of the debate's organizing council. The message was short. "We have reviewed your published work," it read, "and we believe the humans have something the debate has been missing. We are making an exception. Will you represent your species?" Ayana spent a day thinking about it. Then she said yes. The 7th question, the one assigned to her, was, "What is the purpose of art in the face of inevitable extinction?" It was not a comfortable question. The cooperative had been wrestling with the reality of stellar evolution for millennia, the understanding that every star would eventually die, that every civilization built under one was therefore temporary, that even the greatest achievements of the greatest species would eventually be erased by physics. Some species handled this through philosophical traditions of acceptance. Some through systems of meaning-making that located value in the present moment regardless of future loss. Some through the development of long-range plans for species survival that operated on timescales of billions of years. The 6 other philosophers at the debate gave answers that were thoughtful, considered, and reflected thousands of years of accumulated wisdom from their respective traditions. Ayana gave a different kind of answer. She began with a story. She told the assembled audience, the philosophers in the chamber and the billions watching across the cooperative, about a man named Jean-Michel Basquiat, a human artist who had lived in a city called New York on planet Earth in the late 20th century. She described his life: the childhood in a family that moved constantly, the teenage years living on the streets, the explosion of creative energy that produced some of the most significant art of his era, and his death at 27 from an overdose. She talked about what his paintings looked like, the raw energy of them, the figures that seemed to be simultaneously breaking apart and coming together, the text and symbols layered over and under and through each other in a way that communicated something that couldn't be said in words because it was exactly the kind of thing that existed in the space where words failed. She talked about the fact that those paintings still existed, that humans still looked at them, that a being who had lived for 27 years, much of it in genuine hardship, on a planet that was actively trying to kill him in every possible direction, had made something that outlasted him and continued to create meaning in people who had never met him and never would. Basquiat did not know whether his work would last, she said. He couldn't have known. He made it anyway. Not because survival was guaranteed. Not because meaning was guaranteed. But because in the act of making it, the meaning was real. In that moment, the painting existing was enough. She paused. Humans have been making things in the face of certain death for as long as we have existed, she continued. We have painted on cave walls that we knew we would eventually leave. We have built cities in floodplains and on earthquake faults and in the paths of hurricanes. We have composed music in war zones and written poetry in the hours before execution and carved figures from stone on desolate hillsides where no one might ever find them. We don't do this because we believe in guaranteed survival. We do it because we believe in the act itself. In the making. In the being present with what is true right now, regardless of what comes after. She looked out at the chamber, at the assembled philosophers of the most accomplished civilizations in the known galaxy. The purpose of art in the face of extinction, she said, is the same as the purpose of everything else we have ever done in the face of extinction. You make it because it matters now. You build it because it matters now. You love and work and think and argue and struggle because those things matter now, in this moment, which is the only moment any of us actually have. The extinction is coming. For all of us. The sun will die. The universe will cool. Every painting will go dark. She let the silence hold. And between now and then, she said, there will be paintings. And that will have been enough. The amphitheater of first words was quiet for a long time after she finished. Philosopher Quellan of the Deep Mind, who had been chairing philosophical debates for 300 years, said later that he had not heard the chamber go that quiet since the debate of 8,000 years ago, when a young Voran philosopher had first articulated the theory of universal consciousness. The broadcast metrics showed that viewership held steady through the silence, that billions of beings across the cooperative sat with it, in their various homes and habitats and stations, and did not look away. Ayana's answer was subsequently included in the cooperative's canonical philosophical texts, the first human contribution to that body of work. The note attached to its inclusion, written by Quellan himself, read, "The humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them at every turn. They responded by making art about it. We have perhaps not given sufficient weight to what this reveals about their nature." Ayana, when she heard about the inclusion, called her daughter on Earth. "They put my speech in a book," she said. "Which book?" "The one that's basically the Bible of galactic philosophy." Pause. "Mom," her daughter said, "that's literally the most on-brand thing you have ever done." Ayana laughed for the first time in weeks. It felt, as it always did, like surviving something. The message came in on a frequency that the Threshold survey station's instruments weren't designed to detect. Dr. Emeka Adeyemi had been at the Threshold for 14 months, part of a small mixed-species team studying the boundary conditions at the galaxy's edge, where the density of stars thinned to almost nothing and the instruments recorded only the faint electromagnetic whispers of other galaxies impossibly far away. It was the loneliest posting in the cooperative's scientific network, which was part of why Emeka had requested it. He was, by disposition, someone who appreciated the full scale of things. He found the edge of the galaxy clarifying. The signal that came in that morning was unlike anything in the station's reference library. It was not in any known language. It was not structured like any known communication protocol. It was, at first analysis, almost indistinguishable from background radiation, except that it repeated. And the repetition had a pattern. And the pattern, once the station's AI identified it, resolved into something that could only be described as mathematics. Prime numbers. Then geometric relationships. Then something more complex. Sequences that the AI flagged as potentially describing physical constants. Then something that looked like a map. Emeka woke the rest of the station team. The team was small. Himself, a Voran physicist named Sect who reads light, a Quillariae mathematician named Pale Current in Still Water, and a Grohl engineer named Dem who lifts. They spent 6 hours analyzing the signal before anyone spoke the obvious question aloud. It was Sect who said it. Something is out there. Not in the galaxy. Beyond it. In the intergalactic void that everyone had always assumed was empty. The signal had originated from a point approximately 200,000 light-years beyond the galaxy's edge. The mathematics in the signal were consistent as far as they could interpret them, with a level of technological development significantly beyond the cooperative's current capabilities, which put it significantly beyond anything the cooperative had previously encountered. Emeka initiated the standard cooperative contact protocol. He filed a report. He sent the signal data to the cooperative's central analysis network. He followed every procedural step correctly and in order. Then, because protocol was satisfied, he sat down at his personal workstation and started trying to decode the signal himself. He worked for 36 hours without sleeping, which his alien colleagues observed with a mixture of concern and what was becoming, among species that had spent significant time with humans, a kind of resigned familiarity. What he found in that 36 hours was not a complete translation. He was not expecting a complete translation. What he found was a structural pattern in the signal that suggested it was not simply a greeting, not a beacon broadcasting into the void on the chance that someone might hear it. It had a directionality to it. It had been aimed at the galaxy. At the cooperative's region of the galaxy specifically. When the directional data was refined further, the approximate location of Earth's solar system. Emeka stared at this finding for a long time. Then he went and found Sect, who was running their own analysis in the adjacent lab. The signal was sent before humanity achieved spaceflight, he said. Sect's 4 eyes focused on him. How long before? Emeka checked his calculations. Based on travel time at the speed of the signal, accounting for the distance of origin, it was sent approximately 12,000 years ago. A silence. Something out there, Sect said slowly, sent a signal aimed at Earth 12,000 years ago. Yes. Before you had radio. Before we had writing, technically. We were in the late Stone Age. Another silence, this one longer. They knew you were coming, Sect said. Emeka had been thinking about this for the past hour. He had been thinking about what it meant for something to have observed Earth 12,000 years ago, to have seen a species living in cave systems and on riverbanks, drawing animals on stone walls and learning to plant seeds in soil, and to have decided that this species was worth sending a message to. That this species, on this Class-9 Deathworld, surrounded by things that wanted to kill it and under a star that would eventually kill everything else, was a species worth reaching toward. They didn't know we were coming, he said finally. Not exactly. They observed what we were and they made a bet on what we would become. He looked out the station's viewport at the void, the darkness between galaxies, the unimaginable distance across which someone had thrown a message like a stone across water. And we're here, he said. At the edge of our galaxy. 12,000 years later. And we can hear them. The full analysis team filed the discovery report to the cooperative's central network. The response from the cooperative's governing council was immediate, extensive, and involved a great deal of procedural language about containment protocols, verification requirements, and the establishment of a formal research commission. It took approximately 4 months for the commission to confirm what the threshold team's initial analysis had found. It took another 2 months for the political debate about how to respond to begin. It took humanity exactly 11 days to begin composing a response. The response was not authorized by the cooperative's formal contact protocols. It was sent by a coalition of human scientists, philosophers, artists, and ordinary citizens who had heard about the discovery and had organized, with characteristic human speed and argumentativeness, to produce a message that they felt represented who humans actually were. The message was 847 seconds long. It contained music, not a single piece, but a layered composition drawn from every musical tradition on Earth, structured to demonstrate both the diversity and the underlying mathematical relationships that connected them. It contained visual art, thousands of images, compressed and sequenced to show the arc of human creative expression from cave paintings to digital art. It contained speech in 400 languages and a mathematical framework that encoded the basic principles of human ethical philosophy. It also contained, appended as what the senders described as a postscript, a simple factual statement about Earth. The statement described the planet's classification as a Class-9 Deathworld. It described the major environmental hazards, the geological instability, the diversity of lethal fauna, the history of pandemic disease and natural disaster. It described, accurately and without embellishment, the specific difficulties of the world that had produced humanity. The final line of the postscript read, This is where we are from. We wanted you to know. When the cooperative's translation teams reviewed the message before transmission, there was a lengthy internal debate about whether the postscript was appropriate, whether it was wise in a first contact situation with an unknown and apparently advanced civilization, to lead with an admission of your species' extremely difficult origin conditions. Ambassador Keita Nakamura, who had been appointed to the Interspecies Oversight Committee, listened to the debate for 3 hours before requesting the floor. "You're misunderstanding what the postscript is saying," she told the committee. "It's not an admission of weakness. It's a statement of context. We are telling them, we came from the hardest place we know how to describe and we made it to the edge of our galaxy and we heard your message and we are answering. That's not asking for sympathy. That's saying, we know what difficult is and we're still here and we're interested in who you are." The committee approved the postscript. The message was sent. And at the edge of the galaxy, in the quiet of the intergalactic void, the Threshold Survey Station's instruments caught something that might have been a response. A flicker in the signal background that was gone before it could be fully recorded, but that Dr. Emeka Adeyemi noted in his personal log with the careful, excited uncertainty of a scientist who has seen something that cannot yet be proven. "I think they heard us," he wrote. He looked out at the void again, at the darkness and the distance and the faint light of other galaxies impossibly far away. "I think they've been waiting," he wrote. He thought about Earth. About the storms and the earthquakes and the oceans full of things with teeth. About the plagues and the ice ages and the 1,000 ways the world had tried to end them all. About the cave paintings and the music and the philosophy and the arguments and the stubbornness and the love. About the species that had looked at all of that, at everything the universe had put in front of them, and said, "Fine. We'll figure something out." "I think they made a good bet," he wrote. He saved the log entry, returned to his instruments and got back to work. Outside the station, the galaxy turned slowly in the dark. Beyond it, something waited. And between the stars, a signal traveled at the speed of light, carrying the voice of a species from a Class-9 Deathworld, saying, "We're here. We made it. And we are just getting started."